Hi, it's Sam, and today we are going to embark on a wonderful Max learning journey, starting with some of the basics that I hope you'll find useful in your study and learning of Max MSP. First, I want to show you one of the most helpful references within Max, or a couple of the most helpful. So I'm going to create an object here, maybe just a counter object. And let me just go over what I just did. C, this box I'm typing in right now is a comment box, which I created with just the C. And then N makes an object box. And then I just typed in the name counter to make the counter. And it also autofills with whatever you start typing in, which is useful. So if I right click on any object, I'll have some different options. And the first is help. And this is really handy. It'll give you some help patches that show you how that object works. Some of its basic operations, and sometimes they have different tabs, which shows further details about that object. The other place to look is reference. And that gives you even more detailed information about the object. So those are both really great places to look. Another helpful place is under Help, going to Examples. And there are a bunch of example patches you can open and look at. So those should all help you if you're looking for some guidance while you're doing your patching. Now I want to talk about locking, unlocking, and operating your patch. So let's make a user interface object. So I'm going to make a dial by just typing in dial. But I can't actually operate the dial unless the patch is locked. So to lock the patch, you press and hold Command, I think it's Control in Windows, and you click in an empty space. And that locks the patch, and now you can operate any UI objects, but you can't edit the patch itself. And I just unlocked it by doing the same, Command and click in an empty space. However, if you press and hold Command while the patch is unlocked, you can still operate UI objects, which is useful. So you don't always need to lock and unlock it. And in the bottom left here, you can see the current status, if it's locked or unlocked. You can also lock and unlock it there. You'll notice that the grid, these tiny grid dots are a little bit hard to see. Those will disappear when the patch is locked, as will the comment box outlines. Okay. Now, order of operations in Max. Okay, let's make some new objects here. So I'm going to make some bang objects. If you don't know what that is, that's fine. But we're going to use the B key to make these. Actually, I'm just going to make one. And then I'm going to make some message boxes with M. So M, and let's see, I'll make this one. And then I'm going to click and drag with Control held down to copy these. This will be 2, and this will be 3. And now I'm going to connect this bang to these 3 messages. Make sure you do it into the left side here. If I press and hold Shift, I can connect it to multiple objects. If you don't press and hold Shift, it just disappears after you click. So that's useful. Okay. Let's also make some bangs, actually, that this attaches to. So one here, one here, one here. And I can just attach this again, press and hold Shift. Okay. Now, when I click the bang that's attached to the other bangs, it seems like these all are lighting up at the same time. But in reality, that's not the case. Let's create a new object called print and give it the argument, let's say horizontal. Now let's connect this again, press and hold Shift. Make sure these are lined up horizontally. And let's click the bang this time. Now print is going to print the max console, which is on the sidebar here. And you'll see I have the messages 3, then 2, then 1. So that means that the order of operations in max is going to be from the right to the left. So there actually is, maybe in the background, if you will, an order to these messages, even though they seem to be occurring at the same time, they're actually not. And this is important to keep in mind because you can get some strange, unexpected behavior if you don't pay attention to the order of operations. Now, let's try to change this argument to vertical. And you'll see that this ends up being an identifier that shows up alongside the message. So if you had multiple print objects, then you would benefit from giving them different names so that you can see where they originate. Okay, now let's put these in a vertical alignment this time. Maybe I'll put 3 on the top, 2 in the middle, make sure these are all lined up so I can see what order these go in. Oh, I don't think it's lined up, is it? Okay, let's try again. Okay, now I've got 1, 2, 3. So this means that it also goes from bottom to top. Now, what if I move this 2 to the right and try again? Now 2 is the first message that comes out. So the precedence is right to left and bottom to top. So in other words, if something is to the right, then that's going to go first. And then if they're aligned after that, then they're going to pick the bottom one, and that's the priority given to the different objects. And there are ways of managing the order that these different messages are sent. For example, the trigger object, which is shortened with T, is one of the best ways to handle that, but we'll look at that in future videos. Just something to keep in mind, though, that the order of operations, everything is not simultaneously occurring, and you need to be aware of that because you can get some strange behavior, like I mentioned. Okay, let's look at something else, which is hot and cold inlets. So we have inlets and outlets in our objects. I'm going to create some float box with F, float boxes, which is just floating point number boxes, to demonstrate this. And I'm also going to make just a plus, and I need to put in a 0 with a decimal place, otherwise it won't do floating point math. Okay, but what we're looking at here, we have 2 inlets and 1 outlet, and you'll notice that once I've plugged these in, we have an orange and a blue, and these are different. The blue one here is cold, and the one over here, the orange one, is hot. So, what does that mean? Well, right now, because I just made this object, it has a 0 stored in it. Now, if I were to give this a 5, okay, now it's 5. Now, if I put a 5 here, it should be 10. But nothing happened. That's because this is a cold inlet, and that means that it doesn't trigger any output. Only hot inlets trigger output. So now I need to update this. I can actually just type in a 5 again and hit enter, and now it's updated. So you need to keep this in mind as well, that if you're using a cold inlet, you need to update the device with the hot inlet as well. And again, we'll go over how to do this in later videos, but this is just something to be aware of as well, because it can be very confusing if you're changing a value but nothing's coming out. You always need to pay attention to the hot and cold inlets. Okay, so there are 3 different ways to interact with objects. Let's grab our counter over here. There are arguments, messages, and attributes. So arguments go after the name of the object. So right here we have the counter. Now, if we go over to the sidebar, we can also look at some of the references. so we can get some more information about the object. So I can see there's an arguments area, messages area, and attributes area where we can read more about them. So for the argument for counter, there's a number of arguments that you can give it, and this is not typical of all the different objects in Max, but some of them have optional arguments, or they can have a number of arguments that will change how it works. So for this one, for example, if I do 2 arguments, I can give the minimum number and the maximum number. And then if we send a bang to the inlet, it should count from that minimum to the maximum number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then on a loop. Now, that's an argument. There's also messages. So messages are sent to an object. So if I take a message box here, now let's see, counter has an argument like DEC for decrementing, and actually I can just click and drag this out of the sidebar to get a message box with that message. Now I can connect it to counter, and I can count backwards now. Okay, so messages go in message boxes, and they're sent to an object to change something about it, like it's going to output something or change some way that it works. And lastly, we have attributes. Attributes can be typed in to the body of the object by using the @ symbol. And then you can see there's 2 attributes here. So I can say like carry flag 1, for instance. You can also right click on any inlet and you'll see some of the messages and attributes. If I click on one of the attributes here, actually I don't want to look at that one. Let's do the first one, carry flag. Then you can view the current state of those attributes and also alter them. So for example, right now, when it reaches the maximum number, it's going to output a bang. But if I change this to numeric, now it's going to put out a 1 or 0, depending on if it's hit the maximum value or not. So I have the option of either typing it in to the object, changing it from this attribute object, or I can create a message, carry flag 0, carry flag 1. So if I change this to 1, then I can send a message saying 0. So there's lots of options here for how we can change the attributes. Okay, lastly, I wanted to go over monitoring and debugging your patch. So I've looked at a lot of good ways of doing that. So the right inlet of message boxes is useful for looking at the output from objects, and the attribute object is useful for looking at the attributes and their current values. You can also use bang objects to see when output is occurring. So especially for if I'm using the carry flag output that's a bang, it might not be useful to see bang here in the message box, but I can visually see the bang sent to the bang object when it hits the maximum. So that can be useful. Also, if you go to debug and turn on event probe, you can see the current message or the most recently sent message that is in the patch cord you're hovering over. So right now, this has a 5. A 5 is the most recent message through it. That can be useful as well for trying to figure out any debugging issues you might have. Print is also very useful for the order of messages. If you're trying to figure out when messages are arriving, print can be very useful. Okay, that's it for the basics that I wanted to cover. It's okay if you don't memorize all this information all at once, but these will hopefully help you as you begin to undertake your learning with Max MSP. If you have any questions, let me know, and until next time, class is dismissed.